Today I want to share with you 5 bread making tools that will make your life easier. If you want to make scratch-made bread for your family regularly, but you find it difficult to balance work, life, school, soccer practice, carpool, and all the things that you need to do with making homemade bread, these tools can make it more accessible and more reasonable for you to make homemade bread for yourself and for your family. These tools are not required for making bread, but I do think that if you get them and use them, you will find it does make things a lot easier. Let's start with the Danish dough whisk. The Danish dough whisk is made, as the name implies, for dough. In fact, the etymology or the root of the word from its language of origin means dough whipper, because it's made to mix dough ingredients together, and in particular, stiff doughs. Often stiff doughs require a lot of working because they are hard to mix together. But when you do that, sometimes you can overwork the dough and have unwanted gluten development, which will result in a tough final baked product. The Danish dough whisk has these concentric circles made out of pretty heavy or stiff metal that does not bend when you mix it together, and it has these circles that allows the ingredients to push through it, so that way not much gets stuck in here, but at the same time you can easily mix your ingredients together. If you were to use a traditional whisk, you would have a whisk full of ingredients that are really hard to get out, and the wires will bend, and so it doesn't really mix your ingredients together. But the reason why I like the Danish dough whisk so much isn't so much because it can mix together stiff doughs, it's because it keeps my hands clean on busy days. I know this sounds like a small detail, but often I am mixing together my ingredients before I take my little one to preschool. And sometimes I only have like 10 or 15 minutes to get all these things done and head out the door. So when I use the Danish dough whisk, not only does it mix my ingredients together, it keeps my hands clean. And again, I know that sounds like something small and hardly even matters, but when we're talking about a busy lifestyle and kids and running around, even the smallest little details that can make things easier add up to a lot of big benefits in the long run and sort of make or break my ability to make bread that day or not make bread. Now, probably the most useful tool that I have in my kitchen for baking bread and making my life easier is a proofing box. And I will say this is the most expensive of the tools I'll be sharing with you today. I use the Bruden Taylor proofing box. If you want to learn a lot more about this proofing box, I have a full blog review about this, and I'll link that in the description box below. But in short, what this does is it allows you to control the temperature and the time at which you bulk ferment your sourdough. Now, this can be used for other things too, like yeast breads, but I mostly bake sourdough, so I'll be contextualizing it in that. But sourdough bulk ferments the best at about 80 degrees in a humid environment. That can be really hard to replicate in just your normal kitchen conditions. So this proofing box allows you to set the temperature between 70 degrees and all the way up to 195. The 195 would be way too hot. That's just really for slow cooking. But it allows you to set in these low temperature ranges so you can either speed up or slow down the process of bulk fermentation. What this means in the long run is that you can adjust the conditions to match your schedule. So let's say that you know that you need to have your same day sourdough bulk fermented and ready to go in the oven before you leave for soccer practice that evening. You can do that because you can set the temperature higher and speed up the process of the bulk fermentation. Or let's say that you actually want to slow down the bulk fermentation so you can go to work and do all the things you need to do throughout the day, and then when you get home, your bulk fermentation is ready. You can set the temperature all the way down to 70 degrees and slow the process down if that's what you need. For me, this has been invaluable to meet the needs of my busy lifestyle because I cannot easily control the conditions of my kitchen. I don't always know what the temperature is or what the humidity is in my house. So this allows me to really hone the conditions for bulk fermentation and ensure that I have a bread that's ready to be baked when I need it. Another tool I like to use for making sourdough bread that makes things a little bit easier is a Banneton basket. A Banneton basket is not necessary for making sourdough bread. For a long time, I used a bowl and I put a towel in it and just floured it, and it worked just fine. But there are a few reasons why investing in a Banneton basket might be a good option for you. And the good news is these are not that expensive. A Banneton basket serves a number of functions when it comes to making sourdough bread. First, it absorbs excess moisture from your dough. That will result in a less sticky final proof dough that will hold its shape a little bit better when it bakes. And you can see it has these ridges that are stacked, and it's mostly upright. There is a little bit of a slant to it, but it's mostly upright. This allows your dough to hold its shape while it's proofing. The issue I ran into with a lot of my bowls is they were too wide or they had too much angle to them. So as my dough cold proofed, it was starting to flatten into the shape of the bowl. This adds some structure and shape to your dough. But other than these technical aspects, there are two reasons why I really like using a Banneton basket. One, it takes up less space in my fridge. So the way I cold proof my sourdough is that it goes into the fridge for about 12 to 15 hours. The bowls that I have are pretty big and take up a lot of space, and so it starts to get irritating trying to shuffle all the things around in my fridge around these giant bowls of dough. So these hold the same amount of dough, but because they're taller and not wider, and in this case they're longer, they take up less space in my fridge, which just makes life a little bit easier. But maybe even more than that, why I like using Banneton baskets is because I only use them for making sourdough. I cannot tell you how many times I ran into the issue where I'm ready to cold proof my dough and I don't have a single clean bowl. Then I have to stop what I'm doing, wash a bowl, switch things around, and figure out how I'm going to get this dough in the fridge. I only use these two Banneton baskets for sourdough, so they're always available when I need them. And that makes my life a lot easier because I don't have to think any more about it. I don't have to spend any more time figuring it out. And again, like I said earlier in the video, I know this sounds like a small detail, but it's really the small details that can make or break your ability to make sourdough with ease. Another invaluable tool is a Dutch oven. Now, I have a full YouTube video that compares a number of Dutch ovens, so you can check that out in the description box below, and that can help you decide which is the right Dutch oven for you. Now, you do not need a Dutch oven to bake bread, but without it, sometimes, not always of course, but sometimes you do have to do little workarounds or hacks to make your bread turn out the way you want to. And again, if we're talking about making bread regularly, the more steps we add in, the more complicated it becomes, and the less likely we are to bake bread. So in the past, I did not have a Dutch oven, so I would open bake on a cookie sheet. I'd boil water, put it in a tray, slide that in the bottom of my oven, and then bake my bread above that. It wasn't difficult, but it did require a few extra steps. The Dutch oven removes the need for those little tricks or hacks because it traps the steam inside of it when the lid is on. It gives you that fluffy and chewy interior without forming a crust too soon. Then when you take the lid off for the second half of your bake, the crust can brown and get nice and crunchy, just how we like a sourdough bread. A Dutch oven also provides scorching heat when necessary and even heat in comparison to other baking dishes. So I have just found that this makes better bread. And when I make bread that I'm excited about, I want to make more. So that means next week when it's time to make bread for my family, I'm not like, oh, I gotta make bread. I'm like, yes, I'm gonna make bread. The last thing on my list for 5 things that will make baking bread easier is something you probably already have: a cookie sheet. A cookie sheet is really useful because if you don't have a Dutch oven, you can bake on this. But what I like to use a cookie sheet for is to prevent burning on the bottom of my bread. It is a common problem, especially when baking sourdough in a Dutch oven, for the bottom to burn because the dough is resting right on that hot Dutch oven. And then the Dutch oven, of course, is close to the heating element in your oven. So if you place a baking sheet on the bottom tray of your oven, and then on the tray above that, you place your Dutch oven with bread, that will help disperse the heat and prevent burning in the bottom of your bread. Now, I sometimes actually do like my sourdough to be like a little burn. I think that tastes good. But for the most part, if we're talking about an everyday usable bread, having a burned bottom of a sourdough loaf can make things a little bit unsavory. So just a plain old simple cookie sheet underneath of your Dutch oven can solve that problem, and probably, my guess is, without an extra expense for you. I know that regularly baking bread for yourself and your family can seem like an extra task, and to be honest with you, sometimes it is. But when we use tools and tricks that really do make things a little bit easier, take out some of the guesswork, keep the kitchen cleaner, it becomes a little less daunting to make bread, and the actual process itself of making bread becomes easier, which means we are more likely to feel excited and to feel empowered to make scratch-made bread for our families whenever we want. Now, if you want to make sourdough bread and you don't know where to get started, I have a link in the description box below for my free ebook, A Simple Guide to Making and Using Sourdough Starter. It'll walk you through all the steps of how to make starter, how to make your first loaf of bread, troubleshooting, discard recipes, and more. Additionally, I have a number of links in the description box for my sourdough series, so you can check them out there. Thank you so much for tuning into Moon and Magnolia's YouTube channel, where we elevate the everyday from scratch and at home, and I'll see you again next time.